So if I asked you, what animal is the king of all the animals? You'd say lion, right? That was an easy one because of the movie. Well, how about the king of birds? Yeah, the eagle. The king of metals? Gold. But what if I asked you, what's the king of the trees? Did you say oak? Now this is interesting because I ask my students this question all the time, and almost all of them say oak. And we don't have oak trees in British Columbia. Okay, we actually do. It's called the Garry oak, but it basically occupies only a small sliver of land on Vancouver Island. The main candidate for the king of trees in my neighborhood is the red cedar. They are big and mighty. So why do so many people answer oak? And gold, and eagle, and lion? Well, I think it's because of the great chain of being. It's an idea that was prominent during the medieval and Renaissance periods, and it's still in our heads hundreds of years later. So what is the great chain of being? In the Middle Ages, they believed in a highly structured universe. It was ordered because God made it that way. Everything was organized hierarchically. That means it has clear levels of importance, from lower things to higher things. Things that were spiritual were at the top, and things that were just material were at the bottom. But everything was interconnected like a chain. Now, the idea of a hierarchically ordered universe came from the ancient Greeks. But during the Middle Ages, Christian theologians incorporated these ancient philosophical ideas into their worldview. Drawing on what they found in the Bible, they came up with a divinely ordained hierarchy, with God at the apex, followed by angels, humans, animals, plants, and minerals in descending order. So angels are at the top, after God, of course. They are spiritual beings, and they serve as messengers or intermediaries between God and humans. People generally understand angels to possess superior intellect, power, and purity. Then come the humans. We hold a unique position in the great chain of being. We are made up of both body and soul, material and spirit. This duality places humans in a transitional place between the spiritual and the material realms. Humans, then, are a bridge between the divine and the earthly. Animals are the next step down. Although they possess physical bodies and can exhibit instinctual behaviors, they are thought to lack the soul or rationality or higher consciousness that we humans possess. The plants follow the animals in the chain. They are living organisms, but they lack sensation, consciousness, and mobility. Plants were considered as less developed and less significant than animals in terms of their position in the hierarchy. And on the lowest rung of the great chain of being is all the inanimate things. Things like minerals and rocks. They are devoid of life, or consciousness, or volition. These are the least of things and are considered the furthest removed from the divine. Now, when we go into a little more detail, things start getting even more interesting. Let's isolate the human segment of the chain. All of humanity is arranged hierarchically as well. The king is, of course, at the top, and then the higher nobility, and then the lesser nobles, down through the tradesmen and the peasants. And down at the bottom of the list was that person who later would be called the Bedlam beggar. A Bedlam beggar is a beggar that is associated with the Bethlehem Royal Hospital, commonly known as Bedlam. It was a hospital for the mentally ill in London in the 16th and 17th centuries. It was notorious for its harsh and deplorable conditions. The patients had to support themselves, so they would go out begging on the streets of London. The term Bedlam itself came to be synonymous with chaos, madness, or confusion. My mom used to holler down the stairs about the Bedlam in the basement when we kids got too loud and rambunctious. The animal segment had the lion at the top, and what we find at the bottom makes some sense. It's an animal, but it doesn't have too much mobility or sensation or consciousness. It's an oyster or a clam. The top bird was an eagle, and in the number 2 spot was an owl. And the top tree is an oak. The oak tree was really important in England, the place where our language comes from. They built all their ships out of oak. And this is why we think of the oak still as the king of the trees, because that's how they thought of it in England 300 years ago. It's stuck in our imagination, and we've inherited it down through the generations through our language. Gold was at the top of the metals, and you know what number 2 is. Silver. And lead was at the very bottom, the lowliest of metals. Among other things, alchemists worked very hard at physical transmutation. They were trying to change lead into gold. Both were heavy and malleable. How hard can it be? Turns out it was really hard. The spheres go in here somewhere as well. This is the term for celestial bodies. The sun was at the top, and what was next? This one's a little harder for us, but medieval people would right away have said moon, and they would tell us that the earth was at the bottom. So the great chain of beings shows up in our writings now and again. Anything in the great chain of being can be analogous to anything in the same position in another segment. You see, kings, lions, eagles, oaks, gold, and the sun, etc. can be symbols of each other. Same with lead, madmen, and clams. Look at this line from Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. When discussing the good parson, the question is asked, "If gold rust, what shall poor iron do?" The narrator is asking, if priests don't be good, how do you expect regular people to behave? Get it? Let me show you one more. A clear connection to the great chain of being in one of the literary classics, Shakespeare's Macbeth. This dialogue occurs shortly after Macbeth, who was recently promoted to number 2 in the hierarchy, has murdered his king. 70 I can remember well, within the volume of which time I have seen hours dreadful and things strange. But this sore night hath trifled former knowings. He basically says, I can remember 70 years pretty well, and I have never seen weirder stuff than I saw last night. Ah, good father, thou seest the heavens as troubled with man's act threaten this bloody stage. By clock 'tis day, and yet dark night strangles the travelling lamp. It's night's predominance or the day's shame that darkness does the face of earth entomb, when living light should kiss it. Ross says, you can see it's all stormy, but that's not all. The clock says it's day, but it's as dark as night. He's of course describing a solar eclipse. Night has replaced the day. 'Tis unnatural, even like the deed that's done. On Tuesday last a falcon, towering in her pride of place, was by a mousing owl hawked at and killed. The old man says this is all unnatural, like that thing I saw last Tuesday, when a falcon was killed by an owl. And Duncan's horses, a thing most strange and certain. Beauteous and swift, the minions of their race turned wild in nature, broke their stalls, flung out, contending gainst obedience, as they would make war with mankind. Ross says, yeah, it's like when I saw the king's horses go wild and start fighting with the people. 'Tis said they eat each other. They did so, to the amazement of mine eyes that looked upon't. Macbeth's murder of his king shook the very order of the universe. It violently rattled the great chain of being. What is an eclipse but the number 2 sphere, the moon replacing the number 1 sphere, the sun, which is analogous to the king? The owl killing the falcon is the same thing. The bird in the second position kills the bird in the primary position. And then the horses break from their nature as servants of men to attack them and eat them as if they were wild animals. When Shakespeare wrote this scene, he had the great chain of being in mind. Keep your eyes open for this kind of thing when you read literature in English. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.